Alex Honnold, welcome to the Free Trail Podcast, dude.
It's an honor.
The honor is all mine. Come on.
That's the Free Trail Podcast. Come on. I'm so
Look at
psyched.
us. We're sitting in the gym here. We got a beautiful view out towards your playground here. Thanks for doing this.
No, my pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. So obviously there's a million different ways that we can go, and you've done a million different interviews over the course of your amazing career. I usually start these conversations in the same place, which is an introspective question of like, what makes you you? But I feel like maybe because you've done so many interviews, a better place to start is like, where are you now in the arc of your career as an athlete? Like, where do you see yourself on the cusp of also your 40th birthday?
Yeah, now I'm just a middle-aged dad. You know.
Me too.
No, but actually, I mean, honestly, I'm kind of just a middle-aged dad. But I just came home from a 3-week trip, like a film thing to solo thing for. Basically, it was the first time I've done something sort of rad in a while, and I was like, oh, it's nice to know it's still there if I need it. Because I'm definitely spending a lot more of my time just taking care of babies right now, which is just the season of life. But it's nice to know that climbing wise, it's still good when I try.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, but I mean, like, is there anything about this moment in your career that feels different? I mean, obviously it's always kind of a continuum, and there's unique aspects to every year and every season of being a professional athlete. But does it feel as if, like, especially being on the cusp of turning 40, entering a new decade, are you thinking about sports specifically any differently than you did maybe in your 20s?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, it's all a little cliche, a little more intentional training, a little more, basically like my time is more limited. So I'm a little more strategic with like how I do things and how I choose objectives and what I focus on. And, I feel like in my 20s, for sure, I was just living in a van by myself. All I do was just climb nonstop all the time, just try everything. And now I'm a little more, I realize my own limitations more, where you're like, oh, I can't just like climb everything all the time because I just don't have the time for it and frankly don't have the energy.
Yeah. When you look back before you kind of like burst into the mainstream consciousness and you were just like singularly focused and in love with this craft, living in the van, not a household name internationally, do you look back at those times romantically, or are there any emotions that come up when you think about it?
For sure. I mean, earlier this year I was in the van by myself for a couple weeks. I went to Yosemite with the whole family, so a family of 4 in the van for a couple weeks, and then I took the fam home and then stayed another couple weeks by myself, just trying to finish up some projects. And I was like, oh, it's so nice to just be by yourself in a van, just climbing. But And that's nice as far as like a vacation goes. We're like, oh, for a couple weeks, that's like a nice change. But realistically, I'm like, I don't know. I've made choices with life, and like I wouldn't want to be living by myself in a van for my entire life, because after a certain point, you're like, what am I doing? It's kind of grim, But I think I did like 12 years living by myself in a car.
Yeah,
and that's good. Like it's a great time. I think of it fondly, but I'm hoping that I won't be doing that when I'm 60.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to go back to a conversation that you and I had at a North Face Athlete Summit probably about a decade ago. I'm sure you don't even remember this, but sort of introduced me to Peter Croft, who has been a longtime North Face athlete. I was new to the team, and I sort of just viewed him as, I didn't know who he was, just sort of like
that's an old guy with a lot of wrinkles.
Yeah, like an old
and a big friendly smile. Yeah.
But in this conversation, you sort of like reinforced Peter's legend status. So what I'd love for you to do is, for a trail running audience, is like introduce us to Peter Croft, and also like what impact did he have on you? Yeah,
I mean, it's funny because I feel like when I started climbing, Peter Croft was much more of a household name because he was just such an icon in rock climbing. And I mean, he was less of a household name, but within the climbing world, I mean, he's just a legend. Now that's maybe less true just because, it's been 30 years since I started climbing, but he had a tremendous influence on climbing in the 70s, 80s, kind of 90s, like basically soloing down. He's also written a handful of guidebooks. But one of the things that I really respect about Peter now, now being friends with him as an adult, I mean, he was my childhood hero. I grew up seeing posters of him being like, that guy's the man. He was one of the first big soloists, like climbing big routes without a rope, sort of like 1,000-foot walls and things. But as he's gotten older, he's still climbing nonstop. He's still going to the gorge all the time. In fact, he actually went and belayed me for a day of climbing. Basically, I asked if he'd climb with me, and then he basically just supported. He'd climbed so much the day before that he was like, "Shit, I'm pretty tired." And he kind of thought I was going to bail because the weather was pretty bad, but then the weather was good enough, so we went anyway. And he just supported me. He just like hiked around the gorge all day, belaying me on things. And I was like, "What a dude!" You know, like I mean, he's been climbing, I don't know, like 50 years or something, and he's still psyched. He's still getting after it all the time. And to me, that's, you know, for somebody who made his name through free soloing, and 50 years later he's still going hard. You're like, oh, that's amazing. Or maybe 40 years later, I don't know, but.
So in some ways, I mean, every generation kind of builds on the next, and you're sort of standing on Peter's shoulders.
For sure.
I'd love to know two things. Number one, like, I'm sure you and Peter have talked about those early days of him being one of the pioneering figures in a discipline of climbing that you have made very popular. Any fun conversations that have
actually,
emerged?
I would say maybe well known, but probably not popular because not that many people are free soloing. You know what I mean? I actually think, but no, this is actually a whole interesting point, is I think that fewer people free solo now than they did 20 years ago.
Really?
And I think when I started climbing, it was much more common, much more normal. And I think now it feels a little more fringe and like more out there.
Yeah.
You know,
just because of the inherent risk.
Well, actually, I think there are a few things going on. I think part of it is just the growth of climbing. There are more people climbing, and most people come into it through the gym. And so you start by bouldering in a gym or sport climbing in a gym, and both of those are totally removed from free soloing. Whereas in the past, you started by rock climbing outside, and when you rock climb outside, free soloing is sort of always inherent in what you're doing, because like if you're climbing to the first piece of gear, you know, for the first 20 feet of a route, let's say, you are free soloing.
Yeah.
You know, basically you're just unprotected a lot more often.
Okay.
And so I think in the past, everybody had interactions with free soloing to some extent from time to time.
Okay.
Whereas now, I mean, you could climb your whole life and like never be in a free soloing situation.
Yeah.
You know, and so I don't know. I think now it's become a little more like weird, fringe.
Well, cool and interesting, and it leads me to want to talk about something that I feel like would be interesting too. Having just asked you about where you are in the arc of your career, I'd love to have you sort of provide perspective on where climbing is. I told you before we got started that trail running's at like a really interesting moment in the history of the sport right now. And as somebody who's sort of a fan of all these different outdoor cultures, outdoor communities, I'd love to hear from you. Like, where do you see climbing at right now as a sport?
I'm more curious where we are in trail running, but we can get to that. But I mean, so in climbing, climbing's been in the Olympics, last two Olympics. It's like definitely growing, you know, it's been growing like crazy for years. You know, I started climbing 30 years ago, and it's been steady growth ever since. I mean, now you can go to a gym in any big city in the country, you know, and I feel like nowadays, like it used to feel super fringe. Now everybody at least has a cousin who's into climbing, or like, you know, their kid went to a birthday party. Like everyone has some touch point with, like, someone has rock climbed around them somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so it's definitely way less fringe. I don't know. Yeah, it's just bigger. Though a lot of things, I mean, climbing going to the Olympics, people are like, oh, it's going to like take off. It's going to be crazy. And like, it hasn't really taken off. I think that climbing's growth has been pretty steady just because of the growth of gyms and the easier access.
What impact have the Olympics had, though, specifically, if any? Because a lot of people think trail running, it's inevitable that it'll be an Olympic sport just based on its trajectory. It mirrors in a lot of ways mountain biking, climbing,
It'd be
even
cool if it
skiing
did.
and snowboarding. Have there been positives and or negatives associated with its inclusion in the Olympics?
I mean, personally, I only see the positives. I just see it as growing the sport in a good way. Basically, there's like more money in a positive way. More people can make a living. There are more coaches. You know, because as somebody, you know, I've lived in climbing for 30 years. Like all of my friends are, you know, nutritionists or coaches or trainers or route setters, or like basically there's a whole ecosystem around climbing. You know, not just the professional athletes, but then there are like 15 other roles around that. And I think that the more money coming into a sport, the more you can support those kinds of people.
It's so true. The exact same thing's happening in trail running now.
And so I suspect that many of your friends can make a living like making training plans and like coaching people and doing things that they just wouldn't have been able to do.
Having a YouTube channel or making podcasts.
Totally.
So,
and I think that's great, because I'm kind of like, you know, we all love climbing. We're all trying to find some way to do it full time, or in your case, trail running. And it's kind of like, you know, if more people get to do that, that's great.
Well, this might be a good entry point to talk about trail running a little bit. As I described, we're going through this sort of like step change moment in the history of the sport where every week new course records are being implemented or long-standing course records are being destroyed. There's this new advancement in footwear technology, carbon plates, et cetera. Nutrition science has sort of developed this massive energy around it in the zeitgeist. Have there been moments like that similar in climbing where it feels like there's almost like compounding factors that are leading to increase in performance?
Yeah, though actually I'm curious, and this might be like too niche, but with trail running, how much of it is actual performance increasing and how much of it is technological things? Like, because like changes in fueling and changes in footwear, like aren't necessarily changes in performance.
Right.
You know, like our runners getting better. I mean, that's kind of, and I'm sure they are getting better, but how much of the difference in time is due to technological changes? Because like in climbing, there's been pretty steady technological improvement, like ropes get lighter, gear gets lighter. And so that has a big impact, like in say mountain climbing and things, you know, and like your clothes are lighter and warmer and everything is like a little bit similar, you know, so you can like go harder, go faster. But that doesn't mean that climbers are necessarily better. On the other hand, climbers have gotten much better, and that's because the access of gyms and training facilities and things like that. And so there has been a huge rise in performance as well. But I'm curious in running, like, is there an actual huge rise in performance or like, you know, what are the different factors?
Well, yeah, it's a great point, and it's probably a mixture of both. Obviously, training science has advanced, and so people are training more intentionally with a lot more strategy behind it than in the early days. It probably
what are the big differences?
Meaning like, you know, when you're doing intervals, how hard are you doing your intervals? You know, what total volume are you training at, and periodizing a season in such a way that there's real strategy behind it. Because when I was coming up in the sport, it was more just like dudes living in their van, getting up, I'm going to run 5 hours in the mountains.
Like Anton,
exactly,
like Boulder Jesus.
He was
just
my
like,
hero.
Yeah, totally.
Peter Croft.
Totally. That is a really good analogy.
But it's funny because like on the technological side, I mean, there's no question what we've seen in road marathoning, for example, where these super shoes immediately overnight made all previous world records totally irrelevant. And now the men's world record in the marathon's like 2:01 or something. And that's come down significantly just in the last 5 or 6 years. That technology is now in trail running. And I was talking to Jim Walmsley a couple months ago about footwear. And he was basically like, you know, I ran 14 hours and 13 minutes of Western States, which for you who are not, you know, immersed in the history books is the third fastest time, second fastest time. And he characterized it as a bad day. Point was, he was basically saying it was the first time I had a fast pair of shoes. So, in other words, even on a bad day, the shoes he felt still put him in position to run a historically fast time. And then the fueling thing is something that's interesting and that I'd love to hear.
So he is a historically fast runner anyway.
Oh,
right?
yes, of course.
So then, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's not like I could put on the right pair of shoes and run. You know, it's like.
So yeah, I don't know. I guess it's interesting to just see the advancement in both sports and both communities, and do analysis as to, you know, what's leading to the improvement, especially because it feels to me like, at least in our sport, and it may not be similar in climbing, you characterize it as a steady improvement. In running, it's been anything but steady. It's sort of like one of these massive step changes up.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but I think with all this stuff, you always need sort of 10 or 15 years of perspective to like really see how much it changed and how much it progressed and how quickly. Because I would suspect that if you talk to other climbers, there would be some climbers that would argue that like standards are just jumping, or like this is crazy, and you know, like it's never changed this quickly. But I'm pretty sure it actually is. It has been pretty steady. Like I think in rock climbing, you can kind of judge by the hardest grade in the world, like because the grade system is open-ended, so people are constantly establishing new grades. And I'm pretty sure every 5 years or so for the last, 30 years, like basically people have added a new grade, or maybe every 7 years or something. But it's like a pretty, every decade you get a grade and a half at least. And it's just been like grinding along since like the 1970s, basically.
So cool.
But yeah, I don't know.
So coming back to Peter Croft and, being where you are in your career now, obviously, like every generation builds on the next. Does it feel to you as if like you're sort of taking on more of a Peter Croft role for some of the younger up and coming athletes?
I don't know. It's hard to say because I don't think I meet a lot of people who are like, oh, I started climbing because I saw free solo, things like that. So it's like, obviously I've inspired some people to go rock climbing and that's great. I don't think I've inspired many people to do the things that I'm doing. It's like, I don't meet many young climbers that are like, I'm really into soloing. And in fact, I never see people soloing, which is weird because I live in Vegas, which is like great. Basically Red Rock is incredible, easy rock climbing all around. It should be soloing paradise. You never see other soloists here, like ever, which is weird because I think it's one of the better suited areas for soloing in the country. Yeah. And I've done a lot of it here.
Just because of access and
access and actually the style
safety.
of climbing. It's it's basically easy. Yeah. Like the climbing's easy. There's a lot of easy climbing. It translates really well to gym climbing. So it's like big, the way the sandstone is formed is big holds. And so it's a very accessible style where you don't have to like learn some super crazy technique. You just grab big holds. And so I don't know, it would be an easy place for people to free solo, and yet you never see it. Yeah. So you're kind of like, I don't think it's very popular.
Okay, yeah. Popular is not the right word. So let's start talking about training then too, because now you've mentioned a couple of times the emergence of these like gym climbing kids and then the skills you can develop to then take into the real world. So maybe you could talk in a meta sense about, like how gyms specifically are helping the advancement of climbing, and then we can talk more specifically about your training.
Yeah, well, gyms in general, there are two things. One, there's just way more access in that anybody can go to a gym and like find out if they're into climbing. So you just wind up with a greater talent pool, like more people who are good at climbing who find it. But then also gyms just allow you to challenge yourself in a safe environment as much as you want. And so people just wind up getting way better at climbing way faster. I'm sure it's somewhat analogous to like track and field kids getting into trail running or something. If someone's like a Division I collegiate runner and then they're like, oh, I think I'm going to try running a trail. Like they're going to be pretty good at it. Yeah. And so it's kind of the same thing with indoor climbing, like gym climbing versus outdoor stuff.
So we're sitting in your gym right now. Maybe you could bring us into how you use that tool specifically. Like if you're working on a project here in your greater backyard, when you're on the walls here, are you practicing moves and stuff?
Less so than you might think. My training is not that specific normally. I generally train in the gym more for maintaining fitness, like maintaining finger strength, maintaining strength in general. It's true that I definitely could train specifically for specific projects where like simulating moves and things like that. But I've just like never quite cared about any outdoor project enough to simulate like that. To me, it's kind of like I just want to build strength, and then that strength will be applicable anywhere outside. But I generally do the sorts of training things that I like, basically. Yeah. Like finger strength stuff, and I don't know. You just, trying to work on your weaknesses.
Are you somebody who's immersed in the data and doing analysis of, of your training, or are you somebody who's doing it more by feel and more by what is interesting you at the time?
Maybe somewhere in the middle. I've read all the obvious books. I've, worked with some like trainer, like some organization, like worked with different people. I've talked to tons of people. Also all my friends are professional climbers. Obviously we talk about this stuff all the time. So I certainly feel like I know it pretty well. That said, I'm not like into it. Yeah. And at a certain point you're kind of like, oh, if you're trying hard and you're using your fingers, that's probably pretty good. Yeah. And also the type of climbing that I'm known for outdoors, like free soloing, things like that, it's just not that cutting edge. It's not near the limit of human performance. So I don't really need to geek out that hard. And also I can't even climb that hard. You know what I mean? Like in the grand scheme of human performance, I'm like way down there. And so my training doesn't have to be that psycho. I can just train like a normal person.
I was telling you before we got started that I went to high school with Jonathan Segrist, and I thought I recalled reading somewhere that he had been like helping you think about your training.
He was actually one of my first friends that I sort of solicited for climbing advice, but I think one of our mutual sponsors, La Sportiva, made a little video about it, so it became like, he's my trainer, but it's just because they made a video. But he lives nearby. We've been friends a long time. It's the kind of thing where if you're climbing with somebody routinely, it's like you have the whole drive to the crag and then the whole hike to the crag. And so you're spending like 3 hours a day chit-chatting about stuff. And so if you're curious about the best way to train and you're going climbing with one of the best climbers in the world, in this case, Jonathan Seagrass, I'm talking to him the whole time being like, so, how do you do your hangs and how long? And does that help? And like, why do you do it that way? And, and after a few weeks climbing together, you're like, oh, I've learned a few things.
Is there anything specific that maybe is rubbed off on you that either John or another climber has brought into your training that you've implemented that has felt like helped make some kind of a breakthrough?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the thing with training is that it's always changing a little bit, but at the core, it's just about consistency and like stimulating the right muscles the right way. So like for me, that's finger stuff. I mean, also, everybody needs to train different things. Like I'm just weak in a way that some folks aren't. Like a lot of my friends, like other professional climbers, are just naturally much stronger fingers. And I'm like, for whatever reason, I've never had that. And so I kind of have to try to do finger stuff like all the time, or else I'm just weak. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, everyone's just navigating their own path. Yeah. It's interesting that training video with me and Jonathan Seagrass, that was, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago or something, I think. And neither of us do any of those exact things anymore. We both have kind of, like, he's totally moved on. He's also at a whole different level on his own climbing now. He's like climbing much harder and he trains in a different way. And so a lot of what we were doing at the time in that video has totally evolved.
Yeah. You were also just saying before we got started that both you and Jonathan are turning 40, I think.
Yep, this summer.
Year. Have you guys talked about that at all? Like, it's interesting to hear you say that he's climbing harder stuff.
Yeah, he's climbing the
hardest
hardest he ever has.
Do you feel similarly? Like, do you feel like you're still at the top of your game as you approach your 40th birthday?
It's hard to say. The thing is, so I have 2 small kids. Jonathan doesn't have kids yet. Yeah. And that's like the big differentiator where it's like he's just been on this steady path of just constant training and improvement. And, I've been dealing with newborns for 3 years. Right. I'm sort of like, it's just it feels a little different for sure. I mean, I joke, I'm like, I'm a middle-aged dad, and he's kind of like, oh, I'm a high-performance athlete. But he's probably going to have kids like in the next couple of years also. Yeah. And then he'll experience the same thing.
All 3 of us 39 now. Yeah. Only 2 of us dads. All right, so let's talk about running a little bit. I'm sure you don't remember this either, but at that same North Face Athlete Summit, we were like in a bus back from dinner in Oakland or something like that. It was a year that it was in Alameda. Yeah. So it was kind of a boring one compared to a lot of them.
Is it the one where we went to a baseball game?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I think maybe it was on the bus back from the baseball game or something like that. You asked me, like, you're like really into talking about trail running. And you're like, should I run like 12 miles every other day or should I run 6 miles hard like every day sort of thing?
Well, that's a very basic training question.
Right, yeah. So it is a basic training question. I remember just feeling so unqualified to give running advice to Alex Honnold at the time.
I mean, I still don't know anything about running.
Well, share a little bit. Obviously, this is a basically uniformly 100% trail running audience. Maybe you could share a little bit about.
Maybe after this, they'll get into climbing instead because they'll be like, man, that sport seems way more fun, more chill, easier on your body.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, obviously, I know you've done a couple races yourself. You've used running. And I mean, we could talk about the big bike ride that you did with Tommy Caldwell too, just like staying cardiovascularly fit and what impact it has on your climbing.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of general endurance fun, and I like huge hikes, and I'm just not much of a runner, but I like covering a lot of ground in the mountains, and so obviously running is is like the way to do that. Yeah. So I run from time to time. Also, I had a previous girlfriend who was a pretty serious trail runner for a long time, so I would like occasionally run more with her in the past. And I think I've always aspired to be a better runner, where I'm like, oh, I think that's cool. And then the reality is I'm just not that great a runner. And then in the last year or so, maybe a year and a half, I've kind of realized that I think hiking is better for me. Because like I'd been running a fair amount around the house and like around the mountains, around Vegas and stuff. And this is kind of a question for you. So I'm curious about this because so last summer, we had intended to go on a climbing trip to Europe, whatever. And my wife got sick, so we were in Vegas for the whole summer. She was like hospitalized on and off, and it was like a whole thing. Mm-hmm. But so in a way to try to stay sane while like stuck at home and dealing with like 2 babies and a sick wife and a whole thing, I was doing 1 day a week of like outdoor adventure. and I was going up into the mountains above town because it's super hot in Vegas in the summer. But the mountains go up to 12,000 feet. And so I was doing one mountain adventure. But basically, there aren't trails up the mountains, or at least not the cool parts. And they're really freaking steep. It's like steep limestone. And so, I mean, maybe you could jog some of the stuff. I can't jog. It's just way too steep. It's too high. But so I basically like power hike up stuff and then kind of trot down. And I noticed that I could do maybe like a 4.5 hour like mountain outing where I'd like tag a summit or two and then like trot back to the car. And I'd feel basically fine the next day. And I'd be in kind of like a nice aerobic heart rate zone where I'm like trying hard but not getting crushed. Anyway, I found that like a 4.5 hour fast hike, I'd feel better and recover faster than going on like an 1.5 hour run. And like my body would feel way better. Like if I just go hammer for an 1.5 hour running, it's like I feel terrible. And I was kind of like, I don't know. And it seems more applicable to climbing. It's more sport specific for me because you're going up steep mountains. And I'm just like, this is what I do. Like I want to be able to go up steep hills quickly. And I was kind of like, I think I'm better off hiking than going running, because for the couple years before, especially with kids, I'd kind of gotten more into running because it's such an efficient thing from the house. You're like, oh, I'll just go run for 40 minutes. And then I was like, I don't think this freaking does anything for me. I don't know. What's your take
our
on
audience is weeping right now. Well, I don't know. You can look at it two ways. Number one, you're basically saying, that you've given up on trail running as a sport and you're preferring hiking. But then also the reality is that a lot of trail running is fast hiking.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I know, but that's the thing is I think I'm just seeking out things that are steep. And then I'm sure some people could run that, but I'm like, no, it's so steep. No. And like steep with no trail and like bushes and stuff, it's just hard. It's like hard terrain. But then you can kind of trot down it. And so I'm like, I don't know. To me, that like my body feels better from that than like running.
This
flats.
is another symptom of being a middle-aged dad. My wife, Harmony, and I, who's also in studio with us all the time, just talk about how much hiking feels better than running at this point in life.
Maybe you should start a hiking podcast.
Yeah. That's the next thing. So maybe coming back to where you are at your career now, you've got a couple of kids, you're not living in a van, you've got a gym on your property, and you've got an amazing place just outside your front door. You sort of have, the dream here, right? You can still pursue what you love, that being outside all the time, being a climber, while also having some semblance of a normal life. How is like this transition to being a family man impacted goal setting and, how you're interacting with your life as a professional athlete?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest impact I think that having a family and everything's had is like how I set goals, how I spend my time, and also just how much I do. It's like I used to aspire to do something rad that I was proud of like every month, basically, and it's like nonstop. You're just working on a thing. Now I'm kind of like, oh, if I do something rad that I'm proud of like once a season, every couple months, then I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. I'm psyched because it's just so much more of my time gets taken up by life, like taking a kid to daycare and back. And like, we're just sick so much more with the kids and just like, oh geez, but that's fine. That's the seasons of life. I don't know. One of my friends in town, who's also a professional climber, sort of, he's been like talking about having kids or starting a family or whatever. And he's been kind of hesitant because he's like, oh, he wants to like send this other project. And he's like working on a thing. And I've had this conversation with him a few times where I'm like, man, I've been a professional climber for 18 years and like almost 20 years, let's say. And climbing has more longevity than most sports. So I could probably continue doing things that are meaningful and hard for me until I'm like 55 or something, like more so than most professional athletes can, I think. And that would basically mean doing everything I've done and then just doing it again. You know what I mean? Like if I had to go another 15 years right now, I'm like, I might be able to do that. I might be able to go to 55 and be like, oh, that's epic. But then that still would leave another 30 or 40 years of my life left. And I'm like, there's no chance I'm doing it again. You know what I mean? And so I think that, that's to me part of the calculus around having a family and everything is that I'm like, I can imagine climbing hard for another 15, 20 years. But like beyond that, I'm like, just kind of tired. Yeah. And even the idea of doing it all again makes me feel a little tired. Yeah. Because I've been going pretty freaking hard for like 20 years. You're kind of like,
say more about that. Because I feel it too, with running. I'm kind of tired. You know? Like I've put myself through a bunch of wars at this point and it has an impact. It takes a toll.
And not just the physical toll, but the psychological toll of like,
exactly.
Do I care enough to try this hard to do? And I've had this with climbing because, I really love doing things that are new for me, that are harder, like pushing myself and like broadening in some way where I'm like, oh, I've never done that before.
Yeah.
But at this point, for me to do things that I haven't done in climbing is a tremendous amount of effort because I've done a lot in climbing.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so like a couple years ago, I did this Red Rock Traverse where I traversed like all the peaks in Red Rock. It's like this 36-hour thing. And I spent freaking forever piecing it together and figuring out the way to get between the routes and how to summit all the peaks and how to get from the summits of the routes or the tops of the routes to the summits of the mountains and like off the other side. It's like, it took me forever to figure out. And I was kind of like, the whole time, I was like, this is cool. It's a really natural elemental challenge where you start at the north end of the range, you end at the south end of the range, and you climb every rad route and summit in between. So it was like, it's cool. It was like like 25,000 feet of vert, like while rock climbing. I was like, it's a freaking big day out. It's cool. But I'm also like, man, is this what it takes to do something new now? I was like, this sucks, because it used to be that I could just go and solo one of the routes and be like, what an epic day. I soloed this route.
Yeah.
And then I forget the stats now because it was like, it's the whole freaking mountain range.
Yeah.
But I did like, I don't know, 14 or 16 climbing routes or something in, a 36-hour push. And you're kind of like, is that what it takes to like do something you're proud of now? You're like, God damn, And then once I did that, you're like, do I have to do something bigger? Like, I don't really want to, It's like, that's too much.
It reminds me of similar conversations that I've had with Killian Jornet, which is just like a great analog in our sport. He's won
like,
every...
And him biking between all the peaks in the freaking at the Alps. You're like, oh, he did all the 4,000 meter peaks in the Alps by bicycle in like a month or two or something. And you're kind of like, does he need to go climb all the 6,000 meter peaks and higher in the Himalaya in like 4 months by bicycle? You're like, dude, it could be psycho,
Well, it's a good point of just like, how do you stay motivated?
Yeah.
Of when you've done so much, like, how is it that you continue to push yourself to improve?
Totally. And especially, and I think this is kind of the thing as you age or, as you have more responsibilities with family and stuff, is that it becomes harder to make those gains.
Yeah.
And so then it's like the amount of effort, you're sort of like, oh, I want to do something harder. I want to do something bigger. I want to do something different. But you're like, man, it takes a lot of effort at a certain point.
Yeah. And
then eventually, we're all going to get to the point where you're like, oh, I just can't get better. And then you're just trying to hold on. And then you're like, oh, that's even less motivating.
Grim.
But I think we're not, at least I don't think I'm there quite yet.
I was listening to the interview you did with Rich Roll, and you mentioned that somebody had taken one of your speed records.
Yeah, now
recently.
I've lost 2 in the last couple of years.
Really?
Yeah.
But basically what you said is that you felt some sort of fire of like, can I get motivated to go try and take it back? So maybe you could share a little bit about that, or like what your relationship is with like quote unquote competition.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think competition has always been a little bit of a dirty word in climbing. Like people, even though there are climbing competitions and they're well respected and like the Olympics and all that, but in the outdoor space, competition is a little bit less. It's not like trail running where everybody's trying to win. They're actually in trail running, there are probably like 10 people who are trying to win, and then there are like 1,000 people at the race who are just there to survive.
That's true.
Who are just like challenging themselves to see if they can go that far.
Yeah.
But which has always been my approach to trail running. Be like, try not to hurt myself, see if I can survive. But no, I think with competition though, I don't know. It's interesting because in the past I always harnessed competition, I think in a healthy way, but just to see how well you can, you're like, oh, somebody did a thing, I'm going to try to do it better. And not because you're trying to like destroy them, but because you're kind of like, it motivates you to train, it motivates you to challenge yourself and to try to be the best climber that you can be. And I think that that's kind of the healthy approach. I think it's a little bit different. I don't know. Somehow it feels a little different for me now to like compete like that. Personally, like, have you heard, with comedians, it's always okay to punch up. It's not okay to punch down.
Yes. You
know what I mean? Like, and I feel like with some competitive stuff in climbing now, it's like when you're like the dude, it feels weird to like go, like you don't know. I don't know. Is that douchey? I'm like,
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, but then
actually, here's the way to say it. I think that when you're up and coming, like competition and trying to break records and all that seems like a very normal and like kind of healthy way to like prove yourself on a scene and try to like get sponsors, like make a living. Like if you're trying to be a professional climber, that's an easy way to like break into it a little bit.
Totally.
But it's like when you've been a professional climber for 20 years, you're kind of like, do I need to go squash some dude's record? Like, I don't know.
Well, what you're saying is that like for an up and coming climber to break an Alex Honnold record puts them on the map, more or less.
Well, maybe not even that specifically, but for an up and comer to break any record, you're kind of like, oh, you've done something new and meaningful. But for me to go back and do something that I set the record on 10 or 15 years ago, I'm kind of like, do I need to do that? Like, I don't know. I mean, I still kind of want to. I mean, with a couple,
but I guess the question is like, does it give you, even if it is like a sensation you're not necessarily proud of, that's derived from ego or an unhealthy sense of like, this is my turf, get off my lawn. Does that exist in you at all? Or like even the feeling of like trying to fight off the inevitability that we all know
trying
we
to fight off
confront
decrepitude.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, I don't know. It's something that I talk or think about a lot, of just like, how do I continue to interface with the sport that I love without being great at it?
Totally, without winning everything.
And the first symptom of, not being on the top is somebody taking your record. I'm not in any way suggesting you're not at the top anymore.
That's totally fair. No, yeah. It's hard to say with that stuff, because the thing is that a lot of my old speed records, when I did them, they represented these rad adventures where I was like at one point I held the solo speed record on the nose.
Yeah.
And at the time, the record had been 12 hours, and I did it in a little under 6, I think, largely because I did it differently stylistically and stuff. But for me to even climb the nose by myself, I was like, this is the craziest shit I've ever done. It felt so rad. And so then a couple years ago, somebody broke the record, though it's slightly, doesn't totally matter, but he did it a slightly different way. And so it's like the style makes a difference and whatever.
Yeah.
But so he broke the record by like another hour. The thing is, the way he did it actually seems more fun and kind of better. He went a way that requires less. He basically took a lot less gear because he went a different way. And I was like, oh, that seems like a much more fun way to do the nose, because like when I soloed it in 2010, when I did the freaking speed record, which is freaking 15 years ago,
wow.
I had like a backpack on and a whole rope and like all this gear, because I was going up there as like a survival experience. Like, this is the craziest shit I've ever done. Like, let's see if I can even do this, and then 2 years ago, this guy broke the record going up there with like nothing on. He literally had no food and water. He had no backpack. He had like hardly any gear. He had this tiny little rope because he went a different way, so it didn't require a whole rope. And so I was like, man, that seems like a super fun way to do it, because you have nothing on, and so you'd be unencumbered. It's like lighter and faster and just like more joyous. And so part of me is like, oh, I'd love to like throw my hat back in the ring, try again, just because I'm like, if these are the rules now, then I mean, this is a more fun way to play.
Uh-huh.
But if I did it now, it's just not the grand adventure that it was in 2010.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, now I've free soloed El Cap. I mean, a different route, but a route like freaking 200 meters to the left or whatever. It's not that different. And I'd be like, I've spent so much time up there working on different things. And I'm sort of like, yeah, I could try to break the record. And I'd like to think that I could, because I still hold the actual speed record on the route, which is like 2 hours.
Yeah.
The solo record's 4:40 now. And so I'm like, yeah, I mean, I think I'm physically capable of climbing it like that. But would it represent this like groundbreaking personal thing?
Yeah.
Like, no, it would just be going and like putting in the work to beat somebody. Like, that seems, I don't know, it seems less evocative, less like, oh, so grand.
Well, it comes back to the feeling of just like, you've done so much. What do you have to do to get yourself excited anymore?
Totally.
So has there been anything since Free Solo that has felt, I mean, as everybody has agreed, effectively, that is one of the greatest sporting achievements ever. Maybe your magnum opus, maybe the magnum opus of climbing ever, or the outdoor sports ever.
No way.
Like,
that's all.
But
is
there, I don't know, I'd love to hear if like, after something like that, is there like a come down of like realization of like, okay, I did it, what's next? Or the like emptiness of like, what's ahead of me may not ever live up to what's behind me type feeling?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the cliche thing, like, oh, if you win the Olympics, like, you're all depressed afterward. And I mean, and the story with Free Solo, or like with Free Soloing El Cap, is like a little bit more complicated, because I mean, if there's a long form podcast, I'll just get into it. But so the thing with Free Soloing El Cap was that it's largely a psychological challenge. Like, I had physically climbed it with a rope without falling off like 10 years before or something. And so I knew that I conceivably could climb it, without requiring the rope. But it's the psychological challenge of like, well, can you actually do it when it counts? And so because it's largely a psychological challenge, I didn't, and I already knew that it would be like the raddest thing of all time. Like, I was like, this would be amazing. And I didn't really need to build it up even more in my own head, because I knew that it's already a psychological challenge. You don't need to put it even on an even higher pedestal, be like, this would be so crazy. This would be the most important thing in my entire life. This would be insane. So I tried to keep it kind of chill and just kind of keep it in the context of like, and so actually that year, you know, as a North Face athlete, like basically right after I free soloed El Cap, I went on an expedition to Alaska that I was kind of using as training because I was going on an expedition to Antarctica later that winter or their summer. And so I kind of had my whole climbing year lined up with other partners, other goals, other projects. And El Cap was just kind of one of those things where I'm like, obviously I want to free solo El Cap, but it's just fitness for Alaska where I'm going afterward, you know, things like that. And so I'm sure that like you could do the same with a race schedule where you're like, this would be an important thing to win, but I'm just going to use it as fitness for this other thing later in the season. You know what I mean? Because you're like, oh, I want to do this, but I don't want to put too much pressure on myself. So I'll just think of it as part of a bigger picture to like build up to this other thing. Anyway, so that's kind of how I took on El Cap. And so I did the climb and then basically just kept living as a professional athlete for like another year, just doing these cool climbing things. And then it wasn't until the film came out that it was like a whole crazy thing. That was a year later. Mm-hmm. And then when the film came out, I did 6 months of like nonstop media touring, like press stuff. I called it my deployment to Hollywood. I just like lived on a plane and just like schmoozed.
Dude, you won an Oscar, man.
Yeah. Well, and a freaking BAFTA. We met Prince William, Princess Kate, it was a whole fucking crazy thing. Like formal wearing princes and stuff. And you're like, oh, that's weird. And so that was like a whole crazy 6 or 8 months or something. And then that's kind of when I experienced the major come down because that is like such a departure from my normal life, you know, because normally I'm hiking to a cliff nonstop and like it's chill, you're outside. Yeah. And if you're just living in airports and hotels and like crazy venues, it's just such a different scene. Yeah. And so after that, I was like physically and emotionally depleted for like a while. Yeah. Also, I'd been training super hard through that whole media tour, like in indoor gyms, just because it gave me something to like stay motivated. Yeah. And I was actually super fit like through all the training. But then basically as soon as it ended, I just like sucked for like a while. I was just too tired. I'd been going a little too hard for too long. I was just pooped, which in retrospect seems super obvious. But at the time I was like, why do I suck? You know, it's like, I've been training so hard. How can I suck so badly? Yeah. And then I don't know.
Before we got started, we were talking about the dopamine inherent in the digital world right now. And this is sort of reminding me of what you were mentioning there. Or I guess it makes me curious, like, it seems like it would be very addicting to be swept away in that deployment to Hollywood. Did you feel that way, or was it therapeutic to get out of it?
No, the events, the glamour of the events, you're like, oh, that's cool. Like, I just ran into Lady Gaga or whatever. But the actual day-to-day is heinous. Yeah. Like, and that was actually my big takeaway. I was like, I cannot believe that actors do this like every year. Because for me, I was like, this is my once in a lifetime that I'm going to be doing this whole crazy thing. And so I can just embrace it and be like, this is cool. But if you had to do it again the next year, it'd be like FML, you know, like F your life. That sucks. Yeah. Because like, you just don't do anything. Like you literally live. Like I had some days where I'd like wake up in New York City. Like this is a memorable day. I woke up in New York. I flew to San Francisco, got in a freaking car, you know, ride share. It was Fleet Week, so it was like insane traffic, and we drove like across the Bay Bridge and like all the way around to get to Marin, like instead of through the city, because it was like psycho. So it was like 2 hours in the car or some shit from SFO to some like Marin Film Festival. I spoke for like 45 minutes, did Q&A, got back in a car, drove like an hour and a half back to the airport, and flew to LA and did a different thing that night. And I was like, dude, you know, it's the kind of thing where you're like, oh, I've literally been in transit for like, I don't know, like 16 hours of the day or something. And I've spoken, and I've basically been mobbed by folks for like an hour at an event, and that's it. Yeah. And you're kind of like, yeah, it sounds glamorous, but like the actual life sucks. And I was like,
so, you know, this is part of the reason why I asked you, you know, in 2007, when you're living in a van, do you think about that romantically? Because, you know, yeah, it must be exhausting, though. It must also be pretty amazing to have everybody telling you how awesome you are and flying all over the world and feeling like a famous movie star. But at the same time, I can totally, in those moments, probably visualize you being like, man, I wish I was just living in a van at the Crag right now.
I mean, the thing with that glamorous lifestyle is a lot of the time I'm like, I'm literally a piece of meat that's being shipped around in a box. Like some of the time I'm like, they may as well just bind me and gag me and put me in the trunk, because it's effectively the same thing. You know what I mean? Like I'm basically being shipped from one place to another place. And like, I may as well just have like a freaking ball gag and be like, and then they like let me out on stage and be like, how does it feel to be the man? And you're like, I feel like I got clubbed and dragged here against my will. You know, I don't know.
Like, do you get scared on the wall?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, that's like, No, I mean it's all great. It's just it's all an
You
unusual.
must be sick of people talking about your amygdala.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's all like it's fine. But you know, it's interesting though. I mean, so your whole line of questioning though, like
Yeah.
after something like Free Solo, what do you experience like from a come down and all that? So actually, my wife recently encouraged me to. I have a lot of notes on my phone where I keep track of like all kinds of things like training logs and climbing stuff and lists and like aspirations for the year and the last year and just whatever. Anyway, so I have like a list of proud solos, like things that I've done over the years and just whatever, all kinds of lists. She was like, you should have a list of things that you've done since El Cap. Because the thing is, like, I do a lot of corporate speaking and things now, and I have this whole story up to El Cap, and I generally just end on the summit of El Cap. But now that's 8 years ago, you know, and I've done like a ton of climbing since then, and I've done a bunch of film projects and TV projects and like kind of rad climbing and, you know, things that I'm proud of. But for whatever reason, I've just sort of forgotten all of it because like it's not in my book, it's not in the movie, it's not in my show. You know, you're just kind of like, oh, it's just like random stuff.
well,
And
and,
so-
and also compared to that, it probably
Yeah,
it doesn't have the
exactly.
same wow
Exactly.
factor or the same.
Yeah, it's never going to win an Academy Award.
Right.
It's like whatever. But so I started a list on my phone of things that I'm proud of since 2018, basically. And when I started listing some of it out, I was like, you know, actually, I have done a lot of things, and I was like, oh, it's pretty good. You know,
You
like
should post that stuff.
no,
Publish that.
No, it doesn't even matter. But that's the thing, because it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like people are still just gonna be like, that's the guy from Free Solo, and you're like, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter.
All right, so let's talk about one of the things you've done recently. It seems like just a couple of days ago you did something here in your backyard. The gift of the wind gods. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Tell
Well, so
us-
that's the
tell
whole
us
funny
about
thing.
that.
So like that's just that was like a random climb. So I posted that on social, like I posted that on social the other day just because I hadn't posted anything in like a month, and it was sort of like, oh, I feel obligated to post something. And then one of the climbing magazines randomly just like took my Instagram post and like turned it into a news thing. Like this is
Okay.
now news. And I'm kind of like, I don't think this is news. This is like Tuesday or whatever. You know, this is like a normal day. I've been sort of aspiring to do a link up on that particular mountain. It's Mount Wilson. It's like the biggest kind of, it's not necessarily the best climbing in Red Rock, but it's kind of the biggest wall in a way. And it's kind of big and proud.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, every time I climb Mount Wilson, I always get freaking worked. And so I've been kind of aspiring to do this link up, like a up, down type thing, like up a route, down a different route, up something, you know, it's like basically climb all the good routes on Mount Wilson in a day. Though after doing Gift of the Wind Gods the other day, I was like, you know, I'm done soloing up here for the season. I'm like, I'm over it. But yeah, I don't know. But it basically was just like a random day.
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
in a way, I just saw it as sort of like an aborted attempt at trying to piece together this bigger link up, and I'm just kind of like, oh, you know, yeah.
Well, I felt it was an
Actually, that climb. This is an example. So like people ask my wife all the time, like, oh, do you worry about like all these rad things? Like, because I just came home from a couple weeks doing this film project in the Middle East, and I did like a pretty hard solo that's that'll be like a film for something. It's all like NDA. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say.
Yeah.
But it's like hard and kind of rad. I called it in my top 10. You know, I was like, oh, it's hard enough that I'm like, this is cool.
Okay.
And the footage is going to be totally insane, and it's neat. And people always ask my wife, like, oh, are you worried about that kind of stuff? And she's like, I'm not worried about the rad stuff. I'm worried about the like day-to-day home stuff, like the Gift of the Wind Gods thing. Because that thing I just went up and did, and it turns out it was like really cold in the shade, and I was like completely numb from like the wrist out basically for the first couple 100 feet until I got into the sun. And I think that's the type of stuff that she stresses, you know, because it's just like a random Tuesday where you're like, I'm going to go have an adventure, and then you wind up having more of an adventure than you wanted.
Wow.
But
So, yeah, I mean, I felt like it was a good entry to talk about this playground that you've got here. Was listening to something recently that said, you know, you make 3 big decisions in your life. It's who you marry, what you do professionally, and where you live. We've talked about
I'm like
your
feeling
wife and your
great
family.
about, I'm like, feel
Yeah.
great about my life
Yeah.
decisions then.
Yeah. You've
That's
talked
good.
about your wife and your family. We know you're a professional climber. Talk about where you live.
Yeah, I live outside of Las Vegas, which everyone's like, why Vegas? You do a lot of gambling? And you're like, oh, sigh. But no, it's the best outdoor recreation. It's like the best rock climbing in the country for sure. Best 4-season rock climbing for sure. Basically, there's stuff you can do in the winter, stuff you can do in the summer. I mean, the ease of living in Vegas is insane. Like the airport's convenient, everything's like simple and fast, but the climbing access is just psycho. It's so good. Like actually, I mean, when I'm abroad or something, and I tell people I live in Las Vegas, they're like, why? And I'm like, during the Free Solo film tour, I once went soloing in Red Rock in the morning, did this route Epinephrine, which is like a 2,000 foot 5.9, really classic, super fun thing. Did this 2,000 foot route, came down, went home, took a shower, and then made it to the airport for a direct flight to London at noon. And I was like, literally, where in the world can you go solo a 2,000-foot route and then fly direct to London at noon? I was like, that is freaking awesome.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of life, like for my lifestyle, it's so perfect.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for having us here and just being on your property. It is the opposite of what most people associate with Las Vegas.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
So
but that's the
cool.
thing is that I think Vegas, everyone thinks of the Strip because hardly anybody goes past the Strip.
Yeah.
But the thing is, all of Vegas is basically surrounded by a bowl of mountains, and anytime you get to the edge of town, it's just trails and climbing and rocks, and
Yeah.
you know, you can be 10 minutes from a trailhead here and be afraid that you're going to die alone in the woods. You know, it's like
Right.
it feels pretty remote, and it definitely doesn't have the outdoor recreation like population that other cities do.
Yeah.
So you just like don't see people on trails. You know the mountain biking trails are empty. Like climbing is not that crowded. It's like it's so chill here.
Cool. All right. Well, let's just finish by spending a few minutes talking about the foundation. As our viewers and listeners will likely be aware at this point, my sister-in-law, Emily Teitsworth, is the executive director of the Honnold Foundation. Again,
I know what a tie.
her
It's
sister,
classic.
my wife, Harmony, is here in studio with us now. Maybe you could just share a little bit about the origin story of it and like where you were at specifically in your life and your career that made you inspired to start the Honnold Foundation.
Yes, I mean where I was physically, I was just in my van. I was just living. Yeah, it was like 2012, I think, and I don't know. I think it was kind of one of the first years where I started making more than I needed to like live by myself in a van, and I kind of felt like I should start donating to something. And I've been reading a lot of environmental nonfiction and just kind of like worried about the world in general, and I'd also traveled more through expeditions and things, been to other parts of the world, and you know read a lot about global poverty and like global energy access and things like that. And I was just sort of interested in the world. And yeah, I mean, that year I basically was like, you know, what are the things that I can do? And you know, it's kind of a roundabout process of like, you know, what impact can I have? But ultimately I was like, oh, I should just start donating to things I care about. And then I sort of realized that as a professional rock climber, like I'm never going to make the kind of money that can like move the needle on any of these global issues. And so me personally donating could have some impact, but not that big of an impact. But that's basically why I decided to start the Honnold Foundation. It was like, if I have any ability here, is that I can probably leverage the name and the, you know, whatever. I mean, it all sounds kind of douchey, but basically I was like, I'm sure that by making it public, I can rally more money to the cause than I'll ever be able to personally contribute. And so I made the Honnold Foundation as a public thing, and which I'm glad I did, because now we've been given over $2 million in grants the last couple of years. And that's obviously way more than any professional climber could ever generate themselves.
Have there been any experiences where you kind of step back and shake your head of like, wow, this actually had an impact?
Yeah, occasionally. I mean, we actually just had our board meeting a couple days ago. Emily, you know, spearheading a classic, like, here are the programs, here's what we're supporting, here's how the budget's doing, all the stuff. And you're just like, I mean, every time we have board meetings, I'm like, wow, this is so real.
Professional.
yeah, exactly. I'm like, geez Louise. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, it just, you know, we're literally giving millions of dollars in grants to organizations around the world doing work that each time I see one of the project updates, you see the work that's happening. You're like, that's so cool. That's such a good idea. Like, it's so glad that somebody's supporting that. Like, that's the way you want to see like, that's the type of change you want to see happening in the world.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's freaking, yeah, it's great.
It makes me want to ask then if the Honnold Foundation has taught you anything specifically about, maybe business is the wrong word, but just sort of like the economy and incentive structures and how philanthropic work fits with the global economy?
Well, I mean, we get into a whole talk on the nature of capitalism and stuff. But no, actually, I think one of the things that I have learned from the Honnold Foundation, which is not exactly what you're asking, but one of my sort of broader lessons around the foundation has been that I think if you're interested in doing a thing, it's more important to just start doing the thing and let it grow over time. And, you know, because when I started the Honnold Foundation, I was living by myself in a van. I was given $50K a year. I was given it sort of in two 25K grants to like donations to other people doing work. And I was like, that's cool. That's better than nothing. But now we're giving more than $2 million, and there's a staff, and you know, it's like we're having 20 times the impact and more targeted impact on better projects that are better vetted, and it all works better.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of like, and it's been, you know, a bit more than a decade. I'm kind of like, man, I never would have guessed that it would take off like this. And you're kind of like, well, who knows what could happen in another decade?
Yeah.
But the key thing is to start at some point. You know, because like I never could have jumped right to this current endpoint, like where we are now. I never could have started at this point. You know, we needed the years and years to get there.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, that's kind of my lesson from the Honnold Foundation is some things it's worth just starting and like letting them develop.
It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where some guys were riffing on kind of, advice they'd give to their kids. And one guy made a point that feels synergistic to what you're saying here, and just get good at something in life, especially as we're entering this AI era. We don't know what the world's going to look like,
Totally.
what work is going to look like. But if you just get good at something, you have no idea how that's going to impact your life going
Totally.
forward. So like in your case, living in a van in the early 2000s, just climbing, who would have known you'd be giving millions of dollars away, a decade and a half later, just based on the fact that you got really good at something.
Yeah, no, I've actually heard that in some podcasts as well, where it's like, be the best at anything, no matter how niche.
Yeah.
And like, if you're the person that does this one thing and you can do that one thing really well, like there'll always be a market for that one thing.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, oh, I'm so lucky that like whoever would have guessed, that like climbing walls without a rope would be a thing. I'm like, oh, so great. So great.
So great. So great.
No, it's sheer good luck because there's so many other aspects of climbing, most of which I'm not that good at.
Yeah.
Or I'm good at, but not the best at. You're sort of like, oh, it's just interesting that the free soloing is like the thing that people care about. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness, because it's the only one I'm good at.
Well, it feels like a good sentiment to end the show on, but I ask everybody who comes on the same closing question. I did not prepare you for this, so feel free to take a minute to think about it. But my closing question is, who is one person that you admire? Can be inside or outside of sport, living or dead. Why do you admire that person?
Oh, I'll just bring him back to the beginning. I would just go back to Peter Croft. I mean, I think, and this is something that I've always admired in any kind of sports, is like longevity in a sport, like true passion to a sport, like basically lifers, people who have like devoted their whole life to any particular craft. Like, have you ever seen the movie Hero Dreams of Sushi?
Yes.
It's like,
amazing.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Exactly. And that's like, I don't care about sushi, and I don't, it's like but you see that and you see that dedication to craft and you're like, what a dude. That's so cool. And so I think Peter, I don't know, I read a headline this morning about like LeBron James scoring like a winning basket in a game recently. And I'm sort of like, he's clearly past his peak. He's old. He's playing with his son.
He's our age.
Yeah. Yeah. But for basketball, that's like ancient.
Yes,
For climbing,
ancient.
that's way less ancient because it's so much less explosive and easier on your body. But so, I see things like that and I'm like, that's cool. It's like he's literally devoted his whole life to a thing. He does it really well. It's like, I just love that dedication to craft. Yeah. And so, I mean, if you have to name a person, I'll say Peter, because he's literally still out there putting up new routes, climbing all the time and loving it.
Awesome. Alex, thank you so much for doing this, man. Thanks for inviting us into your home, and thanks for sharing your insights.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.